let's get started. Some more people might join, but I want to go ahead and get going. My name is Lindsay Tigue. I'm a professor of creative writing at Eastern New Mexico University. I live in Portales, New Mexico. And before that, I did my PhD in creative writing at the University of Georgia and my MFA in creative writing at Iowa State University in Ames, Iowa. I primarily focus on poetry, and that's what I've published in the most and what my book is, but I also write in other genres as well. So my idea for this workshop was I was kind of wanting to, you know, I don't know about any of you, but at the beginning of the pandemic, I was having trouble focusing. I was having a little bit of trouble with getting writing, but I was finding myself reading a lot of poetry. And so just kind of, I took another Zoom workshop, and the poet who led that one kind of just consoled everyone to say, like, if you're not writing a lot and you want to be, it's understandable, go easy on yourself, but hopefully you'll find something out of this workshop that might, you know, get you started writing a poem or two, or might get the creative juices flowing a little bit. So yeah, I'm interested in the way that poetry, reading it and writing it, kind of becomes crucial to my own processing of the world, and how I started the workshop with the idea of wanting to use it to, you know, process the pandemic. There's obviously a lot else going on since I kind of proposed the idea with the Black Lives Matter protests, and so some of you might be joining with that in mind as well. So whatever kind of is going on that you want to write about is totally fine, but the initial idea for the workshop was kind of proposed months ago with the idea of responding to the pandemic. So if you have any questions as we go along, just again, put them in the chat, or if you can't hear me or there's some kind of technological problem. And keep introducing yourself if you're just joining us. I'm gonna share my screen now, so I'll probably go smaller to show, because I have a little PowerPoint to go through here. Okay. So this was just the description that you all signed up for, but just to remind you what you're getting into if you forgot. So in the life of poetry, Muriel Rukeyser, who's one of my favorite poets, writes, "If there were no poetry on any day in the world, poetry would be invented that day, for there would be an intolerable hunger." These days, many people, perhaps yourself included, are turning to poetry, and perhaps you find yourself even more aware of this intolerable hunger. So how might poetry be a way to process, record, and respond to what's going on in the world? In this seminar, we will discuss poetry you can turn to right now. We will complete actually 2 writing prompts, get you started on 2 in case you don't connect with one, to get you writing and drafting poems that feel present and responsive to our current moment. Okay, so I'm gonna read a poem, and I know some of you are really familiar with poetry, but if you are new to poetry, I just wanted to provide a, let me see if I can. I wanted to provide a list of questions to ask yourself when reading a poem to help you if you sometimes find poems to be a little bit difficult. So who is the speaker? What are, you could say, 3 striking or several striking images in the poem? Why are they striking? What do you notice about sound? What patterns do you notice? What is something you notice about the poem's form or layout? What is something you find the most, what did you find the most surprising about the poem? What confused you the most? And then what do you notice about line breaks? What stood out to you about the line break? And to think about it, think about the last word in the line and the first word of the following line, and think about what the effect of breaking the line there was. What was the decision the poet made, and how does that affect the poem? So I'll just give you a minute to, you know, jot these down if you want to, but also know that Blake is going to send you a recording of this presentation. Okay, so I'm going to read this first poem by Cornelius Eady, Corona Diary. These days, you want the poem to be a mask, soft veil between what floats, invisible, but known in the air. You've just read that there's a singer you love who might be breathing their last. and wish the poem could travel, unintrusive as poems do, from the page to the brain, a fan's medicine. Those of us who are lucky enough to stay indoors with a salary count the days by press conference. For others, there is always the dog and the park and the dog. A relative calls, "How you doing? Are you a ghost?" The buds emerge on time for their brief duty. The poem longs to be a filter, but in floats spring's insistence. We wait. And then this is one more I'm going to read. Storm. Night squall raging. Black branches batter every window. As the sky lashes the city without devices, all I can do is shelter in place and wait the latest nightmare out. Find other sources of power as I sit in the dark, save for a candle burning. For my mother writhing in an ICU, and for the world to make it against all odds. In every sense I burn, in the unseen places, head filling with smoke, each hour lived in a dense haze. Millions weather this 21st century unholy Passover, homes bereft and singed forever. The unruly rich in charge deign themselves gods, maniacal and merciless, every warning unheeded, no bona fide mark of protection this time, no choice in the losses reigning almost everywhere. Candlelight for two is a date, I faintly remember those. Candlelight alone is a seance. Forgive me, my dearly departed, for crying out so often, for still needing you so damn much. So I wanted to read two different poems that are responding directly to the pandemic, and they're responding in different ways. They're grieving in different ways, and to kind of show a variety of responses that people might have in the moment. These two poems come from this anthology, Together in a Sudden Strangeness, which maybe some of you have heard about. It's already available in ebook, but in hardbook, I'm not affiliated with this book at all. I've just been kind of turning to it myself, and I thought some of you might be interested in it as well. So it's already available in an ebook, which you can get in multiple sources. And the poems were gathered in 40 days starting in late March, and it features a variety of poets that some of you may be familiar with. And I myself have been finding it pretty comforting to read. You know, I think I was talking to some of my friends about how when you watch television shows right now, none of them have like caught up to what we're all experiencing. It's all this like, it seems like a totally different world in like the television shows that were filmed years ago or even months ago. And so it's kind of amazing that that poetry is able to respond more quickly, and we're able to get these poets who are writing these poems in March and April so recently, and we can already read them. I'm just gonna stop sharing for a minute to check the chat so that I can make sure, or wait, maybe I can pull it up here. I just wanna make sure no one has any questions. Alex says fireworks have been going off here for months. Yes, they've really picked up this week though. Okay. So this is just the publisher's copy. I won't read it out loud, but basically it's a bunch of poets responding directly to the novel Coronavirus. And it's edited by Alice Quinn. So I wanted to talk about something that I've called in the past a poetry of curiosity with my students. I think of a poetry of curiosity as something I'm always trying to write, but it's a concept that might be useful when thinking about writing poems right now, or poems that you want to sort of engage with the world. So it can be a poetry driven or sparked by facts, information, history, a poetry that is observational but also personal, And it can be a poetry that is associational. So maybe it's a poetry that makes leaps across time to connect with other moments in history, or it makes leaps that you don't expect. It makes associations, essentially. So this is a quote from a novelist, but I think it kind of relates to what I mean. I'm trying to get this thing to appear. There we go. Okay, so children, be curious. Nothing is worse, I know it, than when curiosity stops. Nothing is more repressive than the repression of curiosity. Curiosity begets love. It weds us to the world. It's part of our perverse madcap love for this impossible planet we inhabit. People die when curiosity goes. People have to find out. People have to know. So part of why I like this quote is this whole idea of curiosity begets love. It weds us to the world. So when I think about this kind of poetry, I think about it as a poetry that looks in but also out, and it makes a connection between the two, a responsible connection when that's possible. So I just wanted to kind of use this quote to introduce that idea. So this is a quote, maybe some of you are familiar with the craft book Writing Down the Bones by Natalie Goldberg. Writing is 90% listening. You listen so deeply to the space around you that it fills you. And when you write, it pours out of you. If you can capture that reality around you, your writing needs nothing else. You don't only listen to the person speaking to you across the table, but simultaneously listen to the air, the chair, and the door, and go beyond the door. Take in the sound of the season, the sound of the color coming in through the windows. Listen to the past, future, and present right where you are. And sorry about the typo there, I'm missing that last word, right where you are. So yeah, I like this quote because, again, when I'm thinking about a poetry of curiosity and how it could be a potentially useful idea for thinking about poetry that responds to the pandemic or to our current moment in other ways, is that a lot of times our writing is going to start out of something that we're personally experiencing or some kind of moment we're processing ourselves. But to be truly effective, in my opinion, it has to do more than that. It has to connect to the person across the table, but also the person beyond the door, as Natalie Goldberg says. And so kind of both the personal experience, but also connecting it to the larger context in some way, or even connecting to other moments in time or other places. So another craft book I really like that I'm sure some of you are familiar with, and something that I think, especially for if you're starting out in poetry, can be really useful, is The Triggering Town by Richard Hugo, and particularly this idea of writing off the subject. So he says, one mark of the beginner is his impulse to push language around to make it accommodate what he has already conceived to be truth, or in some cases, what he has already conceived to be the form. He or she, or they, I would add. So a poem can be said to have two subjects, the initiating or triggering subject, which starts the poem or causes the poem to be written, and the real or generated subject, which the poem comes to say or mean, and which is generated or discovered in the poem during the writing. And then he kind of backpedals here and he says, that's not quite right because it suggests that the poet recognizes the real subject. The poet may not be aware of what the real subject is, but only have some instinctive feeling that the poem is done. And so to kind of explain that a little bit, perhaps you want to write about the loss of a childhood friend, but instead of just kind of diving right in and writing about that, maybe you just start with the concrete, or maybe you don't even know that that's what you're going to end up writing about. Maybe you write about a truck that you played with this friend when you were young. And so kind of anchoring in the concrete image or the initiating or triggering subject, which can often be a concrete image, can help you to write about some of those bigger concepts, the, death, loss, love, grief, those kinds of things, without having to address them head on, which can often feel unearned, or it can feel, it can have a disconnect for the reader of the poem. So we're going to examine a poem of curiosity, and this is not one that's responding to the pandemic. It's just a poem that I like, but I think it offers us lessons we can use if we're trying to write about the world right now. And it's by Amy Nezuko. The light here on Earth keeps us plenty busy. A fire in central Pennsylvania still burns bright since 1962. Whole squads of tiny squid blaze up the coast of Japan before sunrise. Of course, you didn't show when we went searching for you, but we found other lights. Firefly, strawberry moon, a tiny catch of it in each other's teeth. Someone who saw you said they laid down in the middle of the road and took you all in. And I'm guessing you're used to that. People falling over themselves to catch a glimpse of you. And your weird mint glow shushing itself over the lake. Aurora, I'd rather stay indoors with him, even if it meant a rickety hotel and its wood paneling, golf carpeting in the bathrooms, and grainy soap cakes. Instead of waiting until just the right hour of the shortest blue night of the year, when you finally felt moved enough to collide your gas particles with sun particles. I'd rather share sunrise with him and loon call over the lake with him, the slap of shoreline threaded through screen windows with him. My heart slams in my chest, against my shirt. It's a kind of kindling you'd never be able to light on your own. So one of the things I like about this poem, and why I think it's sort of a good example of what Hugo is talking about, is it's ostensibly a poem about the Northern Lights. It's addressed to the Northern Lights. Light appears as a motif in various ways, but it's also a love poem. And you don't get the sense that the writer starts the poem letting you know that this is going to be a love poem. It comes out through the details, through the concrete specifics, and through this address to the Northern Lights and to what the Northern Lights isn't and can't provide the speaker. The speaker's alternative shows the sort of love story that's happening underneath in this poem. And so I think that, you know, that's something you can keep in mind when you're writing your own poems about how to write off the subject, is to really start in that concrete place. I'm just gonna pull up the chat again in case any of you have questions. No, okay. Okay, so we're gonna take another look at a poem from the Together in a Sudden Strangeness anthology. This one's by Elizabeth J. Coleman. I see on Zoom he's growing taller by the day. I told my grandson beekeeping started 8,000 years ago. Were you alive, he asked. And I wondered if our sitting there eating oranges cozily mattered when the universe is 12 billion years old, give or take, and galaxies fly away from Earth at an unimaginable speed. I hadn't thought about how an orange is a miniature replica of our planet until that afternoon, when I tossed one into the blue and was only able to clap 8 times before the globe landed back in my hands, its speed of return making us laugh giddily. He didn't want to be kissed, but was all right with hugs and squeezed me tight the next day before I ran to catch my plane. I'll be back in a month, I promised. So this is an example of a poem where we know that it's about the current situation of experiencing living through this global pandemic because of the title, but we also, and because it's in this anthology, but we also don't get any specific details about that in the poem. And that's not to say that that's the only way to write a poem that responds to this moment, but it is one way that you might experiment with. And also, this is a great example of a poem of curiosity. It's kind of connecting with all of these facts. It's connecting with the other character in the poem through those facts. The speaker is connecting with the grandson through these facts. And it's making all these leaps between them. So we're gonna take 10 minutes now to write our own Zoom poem. So Zoom is something you're on right now, so I'm assuming you're all somewhat familiar with it, or you've been using it or overusing it these past few months. So Without referencing the pandemic directly, as the example poem did, draft a poem about something you've experienced or attended over Zoom. Perhaps you've attended a wedding, a birthday, reading, work meeting, whatever it is, or maybe there's several different things. Maybe there's been interruptions in these that wouldn't have happened when they were in person. Maybe there have been people who you've only seen over Zoom. You could describe single or multiple instances of connection or disconnection. And by describing it, the fact that you're writing about this current moment will be apparent, but you don't have to write about it as a whole. You can write about it in one concrete or specific way, in one concrete or specific instance. So I'm gonna set my timer for 10 minutes, and I'm gonna turn off my camera for a minute. Just let me know. I'll be looking at the chat if you have questions. Cool. Okay. And if you don't want the camera on while you're writing, you can also turn yours off. However, whatever you prefer. Okay, we're gonna come back together. I'd just be curious in the chat if anyone was able to start anything that they think they might return to. It does sort of feel like I'm speaking out into the void because you're all on mute.
Yes.
Hello?
You have a question? I don't know your name, but someone's raising their hand. Ellen?
It's Carol.
Maybe.
Yeah, I
Start.
have
Okay, good. Glad. Okay. Great.
Did you want us to read it or not?
Okay, so these are just some other poets you might turn to. Some of you will be familiar with their work. I mean, I'm kind of the opinion that, oops, you could probably pick up any book of poetry and find something that speaks to you or challenges you or comforts you at this time. But these are just some of the poets that I thought of, and some who've had poems that I've seen shared recently. And then also, again, Togetherness, Sudden Strangeness, any of the other work by those poets as well. I'd be curious now, since we do have people who are studying poetry and who are writing poetry and reading poetry on their own, if you have any suggestions for the group, if there's anything you've been reading that you've really connected with, feel free to share in the chat real quick. I would love to hear your recommendations.
Hello, can you hear us? Can you hear us? No, I guess you can't. Hello?
She might have everybody muted.
I can't hear Alex. What is?
Oh.
Alex, just go ahead and type your suggestion.
Well, actually, no, I had written something and tried to send it to you, and it didn't seem to go through.
What is Alex saying? I don't hear it.
What I had written did not seem to go through.
Alex, type it.
Maybe you should type it instead of saying it.
Okay, well, he said he had written something and tried to send it to you, but it didn't go through. Okay. If everyone could just mute, just so that it's not confusing with different people talking. Some really good suggestions in the chat box. So take a look there. Natasha Trethaway. Sharon Olds. Great, yeah, some really good suggestions. Okay, so we're gonna do one more start, because I don't know about you, but whenever I take a class like this, I usually connect with one of the prompts and I get nothing out of the other one. So you'll probably split the difference and connect with one more than the other. So we'll only spend about 7 minutes on this one just for the sake of time, because we're already at about 6:40. So this one I call Define Your Terms, and you start with a literal definition of a term. You start matter of fact. I'll give you a few examples to get you started. You'll probably have to look this up on your phone or something, but look up what the definition is. And if the term has multiple definitions, you might choose to write about a combination. Then think about what the term makes you think of. What does it remind you of? I think of this prompt as a prose poem, so just kind of writing within one paragraph, and then starting with the literal, the concrete, and then moving into more associational, what it makes you think of, what it reminds you of. Without breaking the paragraph, you can start writing about your own life or about important associations this term brings up for you. So I was thinking about all the terminology. Normally I do this prompt with my students and we use the terminology of the natural world, like they'll do ocean or soil or earth or something like that. But I was thinking about all of the terms that have entered our lives and our lexicon, particularly with regard to COVID-19. And then I did add some things that have to do with the Black Lives Matter protests, if that is what you're here to write about. Though some of those terms aren't new to us, it's just that we are, you know, importantly thinking about them right now. So I did include some of those as well, but the terms that I initially had for this PowerPoint, because they are these like linguistic things that have come into the lexicon. Social distancing was not a word that I used a year ago, and now I feel like I hear it several times every day. Things like shelter in place. The term shelter in place is used a lot in the anthology of poets who are responding to the pandemic. Phased reopening, asymptomatic, aerosol, community spread, contact tracing, exponential growth, herd immunity, mitigation, super spreader. All of these terms, there might be an idea here that you want to start with. You could also pick something that has nothing to do with what's going on right now. You could pick a terminology for a subject you know a lot about. Like I had a geologist take my class and they wanted to do geology terms. So that's something you could also do. This really works with any topic. So this is an example of a student poem from one of my classes, and she gave me permission to share it with you. And she did hers on a salt marsh. Like I said, I kind of did more terminology of the natural world in my creative writing class. So the salt marsh is the ecotone between land and sea, a place where water is cleansed, sediment is protected, and species are born. Salinity levels in the water make it impossible for many plants to survive, so the biodiversity of the flora is limited. Salicornia bigelovi, Juncus romarianus, and Spartina americanus make up a large fraction of the plant population. The soil is high in organic matter and loves to eat shoes and munch on pant legs. Low tide offers a solidish walking ground to explore the wonderful ecosystem, while high tide is a recipe to get stuck in the black sediment below foot. Fiddler crabs gather to search for food and bioturbate the soil, while periwinkle snails climb the Spartina as the tide rises. The salt marsh is a place where I can breathe. The salty sulfur air feels right in my lungs, like a breath of pure, unadulterated nature. During the day, the sun is a low, ruthless fire upon your back, as nothing but the waist-height Spartina in the low marsh provide any semblance of shade. As the sun descends in the sky, the Salicornia becomes a stunning shade of golden green as fiddler crabs skitter around its roots. When the sun falls below the horizon, only the cool sea breeze remains to wash away your worries. Fears and faults and thoughts melt away in the marsh. It's just you and the beautiful, undaunting ecosystem ahead. So this is an example from a student who had never written poetry before, and she was also taking a class on the ecosystem of the salt marsh, just an ecology class, and part of what they were learning was on Sapelo Island in Georgia and the salt marshes there. So this is what she wrote about, but you can see that there's kind of this pivot moment in the middle of the poem, and that's sort of what I want you to think about doing. Obviously, with these starts, they could end up being something that you maybe have one line or one even word or phrase that becomes the kernel of something else. So they really are just that, they're starts, and they're not meant to create, you know, a full poem right away. But I think it's kind of helpful to begin this start as a prose poem because of the way it just like bleeds right into the next thought, and it allows that association to happen within a really condensed space. So take 7 minutes to try this one out. This one may go better for you, it may go worse, but at least you have 2 different prompts to work with here. And I'll look at the chat if you have any questions. Okay, so we're gonna come back. We have a few more minutes here. We had a question about recommendations for books that go through the type of poetry. So if anyone has any suggestions for that, or a website, the Poetry Foundation or poets.org are great websites that go into the different sort of traditions of poetry. If you're talking about writing poems and getting started kind of mastering different aspects of craft, I really like the book Writing Poems, edited by Robert Wallace, Michelle Boiseau, and Hadara Bar Nadav. But if anyone has any other suggestions, feel free to leave them in the chat. But that's a good question. So these are just some other ideas that we won't take time to do, but you might want to, if you want to kind of try more prompts out on your own. I like starting with a news article, or even picking part of the news article as an epigraph. I'm sure some of you have done that before, but looking at particularly the news that's going on right now. Sometimes I like to look at less serious, like BuzzFeed listicles, or kind of those more off the wall articles that you might find on like weather.com as a kind of starting point, or even going to, like, if you want to think about, I think on Wikipedia, there's like something happened on this day, or history that happened on this day, if you want to think about connecting to other moments in time. And yeah, think about incorporating your source maybe into the title or into an epigraph. I've heard this recommended by a lot of poets in the different workshops I've taken over the years. So in case it's a new idea for you, keep an image journal. And when I say image, I don't just mean visual. It could be sonic, it could be, a different kind of sensory image, or just kind of even snippets of conversation sometimes. So I don't really write by hand a lot, but I do have a notebook where I write little snippets or little ideas in. And then I go back to that when I'm wanting to start a poem. And sometimes putting two things that don't feel related off the bat together from that journal will be a really productive start for a poem for me. And then kind of coming up with a way to save your research, I think, is really helpful. Like I use Evernote, but bookmarking, that kind of a thing. And then when you're kind of stuck, again, bringing two things together that you might not have initially thought can be a really useful starting point. I have one more poem to read by Ross Gay, and then just thought we would end with a poem by Ross Gay. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with him as a poet, but I really recommend his books, and his poetry book is one of the ones that my students said was their favorite from this past year. So, okay. Pulled over in Short Hills, New Jersey, 8 a.m. It's the shivering. When rage grows hot as an army of red ants and forces the mind to quiet the body, the quakes emerge, sometimes just the knees, but at worst through the hips, chest, neck, until, like a virus, slipping inside the lungs and pulse, every ounce of strength tapped to squeeze words from my taut lips, his eyes scanning my car's insides, my eyes, my license, as I answer the questions 3, 4, 5 times, my jaw tight as a vice, his hand massaging the gun butt. I imagine things I don't want to, and inside beg this to end before the shiver catches my hands and he sees and something happens. So again, I recommend reading, he was on the list, but definitely a poet to turn to right now and always. So those were the questions again, in case you didn't get to write them down before. We won't spend any more time on that. And then I just want to take the last couple minutes here to let you know about my 4-week class that starts on July 6th. So thinking through how we are in these kind of more constricted bubbles, or, where our movement is sort of being curtailed, where depending on where we live, maybe we can explore the parks, or we can explore the areas around our house, or perhaps we can only explore a backyard. So I'm going to be coming up with a series of prompts, walks, drives, backyard explorations, things that you can start with in the concrete for what's around you, but you can connect to what's going on, and kind of enact the poetry of curiosity that we've been talking about. Eric says he's already signed up for it. That's great. And it would be so great to get to know some of you a little bit more, be able to read your work and comment on your work and have you comment on each other's work. What's the link? The link to the class is available on Writing Workshops Dallas. It's through the same organization that you're currently signed up for. So yeah, it would be great to see some of you there, and it's starting just soon on July 6th. And it won't be through Zoom so much as asynchronous. So we'll be doing discussion boards, and I'll have some videos and some other materials that I'll share every week. And then I'll be providing you with written feedback on your work every week. And then I'll be also providing prompts every week. Yes, it's not a free class like the Zoom workshop. It does have a cost, and I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but it is on the website for Writing Workshops Dallas. And then I also teach in the undergraduate and MA program at ENMU, and we do have an online master's program with a creative writing thesis. So just wanted to let you know about that also. So thank you for joining me today to discuss poetry and how we can look both outside and within for inspiration. And I'm just wondering if you have any questions for me about the class, or we already had a really good question about book recommendations. But yeah, thank you so much. And it's weird kind of talking out into a sea of silent faces, but I hope you got something out of it. I'll just see if there's any questions, but if you don't have any questions, then that's all. Thanks for coming. No questions, so I think that's it. I'll write my email in the chat in case you don't have it, and feel free to email me with questions as well. All right, goodbye, everybody.